Red Dwarf, Infinity Welcomes Careful Drivers by Grant Naylor. Episode 5. 3 million years from Earth, the mining ship Red Dwarf, its crew, Dave Lister, the last human being alive, Arnold Rimmer, a hologram of Dave's dead bunkmate, and Cat, a humanoid creature who evolved from cats. Keen to get back to Earth, Lister and the cat were about to go into stasis for the return journey when Holly received an SOS from the Nova 5, an American ship crash-landed on a nearby moon. Crichton, the service android on Nova 5, reported 3 female crew members as the only survivors, injured but stable. In the lonely depths of deep space, such chance encounters make life worth living, and the excitement on Red Dwarf is only matched by the flurry of preparations aboard the Nova 5.
Come on, everyone, they're here. They're in orbit. Heavens, there's so much to do.
Crichton rushed down the sloping corridor, pausing only to water a lusciously green plastic pot plant. Things were going very well indeed. The girls had been quiet and really most forlorn of late. Being marooned light years from home with scant hope of rescue had been very trying, to say the least. He'd done his best to keep them entertained, to keep their spirits high, but over the last few weeks he'd felt intuitively that they were losing hope. In an odd kind of way, Crichton was grateful for the accident. His life had taken on a new vitality. He was needed. The girls depended on him. His days were full. There was the cooking, the changing of the bandages, the physiotherapy, and of course, there was the cleaning. Crichton took almost orgasmic delight in housework. Piles of dirty dishes thrilled him. Mounds of unwashed laundry filled him with rapture. An unmopped floor left him dry-mouthed with lust. He loved cleaning things even more than he loved things being clean, and things being clean sent him into a frenzy of ecstasy. And at night, when everyone was safely tucked in bed and all the chores were done, he'd sink into his favorite chair, cushions up plump, and watch Androids. Androids was a soap opera aimed at the large mechanical audience who had huge buying power when it came to household goods. Crichton had all 1,974 episodes on disc. He'd seen them all many times, but he still winced when Castares was killed in the plane crash. He still wept when Rose left Benson. He still laughed when Hudson won the mechanoid lottery and hired his human master as a servant. Androids, Crichton told himself, was his one vice. That and the single chocolate he allowed himself each viewing to conserve supplies. When he watched Androids, he wasn't just a mechanoid marooned light years from nowhere with 3 demanding dependents and a never-ending schedule of work. He was somewhere different, somewhere glamorous. He was someone else. Crichton rushed down the slope onto the main service deck where the girls were breakfasting.
Come on, they're here.
He clapped his hands. Richards, Schumann and Fantozzi didn't move. They hadn't moved, in fact, for almost 3 million years. The 3 skeletons sat round the table in freshly laundered uniforms and grinned.
I don't know what's so funny. They'll be here any moment, and there's so much to do. Miss Elaine, honestly, you haven't even made an effort. Look at your hair.
He combed her long blonde wig with smooth, gentle strokes. When her hair was just so, he stood back and eyed her critically.
Dazzling. You could go straight onto the cover of Vogue.
He shuffled down the table.
Miss Yvette, you haven't touched your soup. It's no wonder you're looking so pasty.
He patted her gingerly on the shoulder. There was a long, slow creaking noise, and the skeleton slumped face down into the bowl of tomato soup. Crichton threw up his hands in horror.
Eat nicely, Miss Yvette. What will that nice Captain Rimmer think if he sees you eating like that?
He hoisted the skeleton back onto the chair, sprayed her with a squirt of window clean, and gave her head a quick polish.
Now then, Miss Kirsty.
He waddled over to the remaining skeleton and looked her up and down, the trendy knee-length boots, the chic, deep-red miniskirt, and the peaked velvet cap cocked at a racy angle.
No, He beamed, putting the hairbrush away. "You look absolutely perfect."
The cat slinked down the docking bay gantry in his gold hand-stitched flight suit. He climbed up the boarding steps into Blue Midget, where Lister and Rimmer were sitting in the drive seats waiting for him.
Put your shades on, guys. You're looking at a nuclear explosion in Lurex.
He gleamed a smile at them and fluttered his eyes.
"You're looking good,"
said Lister, craning round.
Looking good? Did I hear the man say, looking only good? Buddy, I'm a plastic surgeon's nightmare. Throw away the scalpel, improvements are impossible.
Lister flicked on the remote link with Holly. Holly appeared on the screen, looking somehow different. Lister scrutinized the image. He couldn't quite work out what it was.
"All right then, dudes? Everybody set?"
Lister twigged.
Holly, why are you wearing a toupee?
Holly was upset. He spent some considerable time corrupting his digital image to give himself a more full head of hair.
"So it's not undetectable then? It doesn't blend in naturally and seamlessly with my own natural hair?"
"It looks," said Lister, "like you've got a small furry animal nesting on top of your head."
What is wrong with everybody?
Rimmer straightened his cap.
3 million years without a woman and you all go crazy.
Blue Midget, the powerful haulage transporter, originally designed to carry ore and silicates to and from the ship, looked strangely graceful as it flickered between the red and blue lights of the twin sun system above the howling, icy green wasteland of the moon that had become Nova 5's graveyard. Lister peered through the furry dice dangling from the windscreen.
Nice place for a skiing holiday.
The tracking monitor started delivering a series of rapid bleeps.
We've got it!
Rimmer cried.
Lap 27-4, long 17-7.
Lister looked at him like he was speaking Portuguese.
Left a bit and round that glacier.
Oh, right. Lister landed appallingly in 47th gear. Blue Midget stalled, bounced and rocked, before settling to rest with an exhausted sigh. Lister pushed in the button marked C. The caterpillar tracks telescoped out of their housing, rotated down to the icy emerald surface, and hoisted the transporter 10 feet above the ground.
Hey,
said the cat, impressed.
You really can't drive this thing.
Actually, said Lister, I thought that was a cigarette lighter. The red-hot wiper blades melted green slush from the windscreen as Blue Midget rose and fell over a series of icy dunes. As they reached the peak of the next range, they saw in the hollow below the broken wreck, jutting out of the landscape like a child's discarded toy.
Yahoo!
"Ah, come in, come in."
Crichton ushered them in from the airlock.
"How lovely to meet you,"
he said, and bowed deeply.
What a delightful craft,
said Rimmer, speaking too loudly.
Reminds me of my first command.
He turned and hissed to Lister.
Call me Ace.
Crichton went through a large pear-shaped hatchway, and they followed him across what must have been the ship's engine room. Even Lister, who knew next to nothing about these things, could tell the Nova 5's technology was far in advance of Red Dwarf's. Taking up 3/4 of the room was the strangest piece of machinery Lister had ever seen.
What's that?
"It's the ship's drive. It's the duality jump."
What's a duality jump? Don't be thick, Lister. Everyone knows what a duality jump is,
said Rimmer, lying. Crichton walked round the corner and down the ramp onto the service deck.
"Well, here they are."
Without looking where Crichton was beckoning, Rimmer bent down on one knee and swept his cap in a smooth arc.
Enchanté,
he purred. Lister and the cat tumbled in behind him. Their eyes met the hollow sockets of the 3 grinning skeletons sitting around the table. There was a very, very long silence.
"Well, isn't anybody going to say hello?"
Hi, I'm Dave. This is the cat, and this here is Ace.
Rimmer still hadn't stood up from his sweeping bow. Lister leaned over and whispered to him conspiratorially,
I think that little blonde one's giving you the eye cap.
Now, you all get to know one another, and I'll run off and fetch some tea.
He staggered off up the slope.
I don't believe this,
said Rimmer, massaging the H on his forehead.
Our one contact with intelligent life in over 3 million years, and he turns out to be the android version of Norman Bates.
Lister walked up to the table and put his arms around two of the skeleton's shoulders.
I know this may not be the time or the place to say this, girls, but my mate Ace here is incredibly brave.
Crichton raced back down the slope, carrying a tray which held several plates of triangular-shaped sandwiches, a pot of steaming tea, and a plate with 7 of his precious chocolates on it. As he laid out the cups on the table, he looked up, suddenly aware of the lack of conversation.
Is there something wrong?
Something wrong? They're dead!
Who's dead?
Asked Crichton, pouring some milk into the cups.
They're dead!
Rimmer waved at the 3 skeletons.
They're all dead!
My God!
Crichton stepped back in horror.
I was only away 2 minutes.
They've been dead for centuries!
No!
Yes!
Are you a doctor?
You only have to look at them! They've got less meat on them than a chicken nugget!
Well, what am I going to do? I'm programmed to serve them.
Well, the first thing we should do is, bury them.
You're that sure they're dead?
Rimmer sighed.
Look, there's a very simple test.
He walked up to the head of the table.
All right, hands up any of you who are alive.
Crichton looked on anxiously. To his dismay, there was no response. He made frantic signals, coaxing the girls to raise their hands.
Okay,
said Rimmer finally. Crichton's shoulders buckled, and he dropped limply into a chair, totally defeated.
I thought they might be... but I wouldn't allow myself. I didn't want to admit... I'm programmed to serve them. It's all I can do. I let them down so badly.
He took a sonic screwdriver from his top pocket, flipped a series of release catches on his neck, removed his head, and plonked it unceremoniously down onto the table.
What are you doing?
Said the cat.
I'm programmed to serve,
said Crichton's head.
They're dead. I'm activating my shutdown disk.
Whoa,
said Lister.
Slow down.
Crichton's hands twisted the right ear off his disembodied head and pressed a latch which flipped open his skull.
Crichton, listen to me.
Crichton started removing the minute circuit boards from inside his brain and stacking them neatly on the table.
Crichton!
He tugged out several batches of interface leads, neatly wrapped them up, and placed them tidily beside the rest of his mind. Finally, he located his shutdown program.
Sorry about the mess,
he said, and switched himself off.
It's driving me batty! Must you do it here?
Rimmer surveyed the array of android organs spread higgledy-piggledy all over the sleeping quarters.
What's this on my pillow? It's his eyes! I'm trying to fix him,
said Lister. It had taken them a week to transport the 2 broken halves of the Nova 5 back to Red Dwarf, and now the service droids had the salvage operation fully underway.
What the smeg do you want to repair him for anyway? He's just a mechanoid. A mechanoid that's gone completely barking mad.
I want to find out about the duality drive. I want to know if we can fix it. And, I don't know, I feel sorry for him. Lister prodded one of Crichton's circuit boards with the soldering iron.
Quark Dingbat Physicog Netherlands,
said Crichton's disembodied head. Lister cursed. He peeked into Crichton's mechanoid brain, tutted, and fished out a half-eaten 3-day-old cheese sandwich with chili dressing. Said Crichton. Lister twiddled about inside his head with a sonic screwdriver.
Hello, Mr. David.
Yes! I've done it! You're back in action?
He put Crichton's skull piece back into place, fastened the latches, and replaced his ear.
How'd you feel?
Everything seems to be functioning.
Listen, there's something I need to know. What's the duality jump?
A plastic frown rippled across Crichton's brow.
It powers the ship. It's a quantum drive. It allows you to leap from one point in space to another. Why?
How does it work?
I'm just a mechanoid. I don't know these things.
How does it work, Crichton? Bit by bit, Lister wheedled what he could out of Crichton and doggedly pieced together what he needed to know. When you made a duality jump, it seemed, you temporarily coexisted at 2 points in the universe. Then you chose one of these points to be in. In this way, you could leapfrog across the universe, not bound by the limits of space-time. So, how long would it take a duality jump to get back to Earth?
2, Crichton mused. Perhaps even 3 months.
3 months?
But there's no fuel. It decayed centuries ago.
What kind of fuel does it need?
I don't know. I'm just a mechanoid. I just clean things.
But you know, don't you?
Only because I heard Miss Yvette talk about it once. But I'm not supposed to know.
What is it?
Uranium-233, whatever that is.
Yes! Lister thumped the table. Nice one, Crichton. The lift doors split open and disgorged a tired but happy Lister onto the habitation deck corridor. He'd spent the last 2 days and a night down in the technical library, then another morning liaising with Holly in the geology lab. In the last 56 hours, he'd learnt many things. This was the way it went. Fissile uranium-233 could be synthesized from the non-fissile thorium isotope, thorium-232. And this was the best part. Thorium-232 wasn't even rare. It was abundant in the universe, and this was confirmed when his radiometric spectrographic survey turned up 7 likely moons in this solar system alone. On the nearer moon, less than 5 days' journey away, there was an 87% probability that the ore deposits he needed were lying close to the surface. No shafts, no pit props, no radon gas ventilation problems. Maybe he could do it. Red Dwarf was a mining ship. It had all the equipment, the earth-moving vehicles, the processing plants, the whole enchilada. Hey, cat, wake up. Lister rocked the locker. The cat opened one eye.
This better be good. I was sleeping, and sleeping is my 3rd favorite thing.
Come on, follow me.
Where are we going?
Mining. Lister's empty supper plate lay on the floor. He was watching Frank Capra's It's a Wonderful Life. The movie was as great as ever, and he would never get tired of watching it. But he couldn't concentrate on anything because he knew he was finally going back home. Earth. He could taste it. The 2 halves of Nova 5 had been welded together and the ship made spaceworthy. It was fueled and ready to go. The service droids were making the final checks and loading supplies. Tomorrow, they were leaving. Within weeks, Lister would be back on Earth. Earth, that septic orb, that dirty, polluted world he loved. He ached for the sting of the city street. He longed to look up at a winter sky and see again the huge artificial ozone plug which sat above the Earth like an absurd toupee. Earth. It was a pigsty. But it was his home, where he belonged, and where he was finally going. The big clock on the wall tocked round to 5 o'clock, and Lister lifted up the flap on the counter and turned the sign on the door to closed. Bailey's Perfect Chamois Kebab Emporium was shutting for the day. He grabbed his overcoat and scarf, pulled on his fur-lined deerstalker and mittens, and walked out into the crisp, white snow. The bell on the door jangled behind him. There was never any need to lock the shop, not here in Bedford Falls. Lister crunched across the Eiderdown street and headed for the bank. A group of carol singers were standing round the war memorial, belting out God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen. "Merry Christmas," he said, and dropped $2 into their can. It being after 5 o'clock and Christmas Eve, the bank was closed, of course. Lister tried the door. It jangled open. "Hello?
Anybody home? Horace, are you there? Horace stepped through the back door, holding a sheet of wrapping paper and some string.
Sorry, Mr. Bailey. I was just wrapping presents for the kids up at the orphan home. You ever tried to wrap a hula hoop? I'll be a monkey's uncle if I can figure it.
Lister smiled and pulled out a handful of candy sticks from his huge overcoat pocket. I didn't have time to wrap them. Hope the orphanage doesn't mind.
They won't mind, George. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, Horace, said Lister, and walked back out into the street, where his rickety old Model A Ford was covered in snow. He took the hand crank from the bench seat and jerked the engine into spluttering life. As he turned left at Martini's bar, his arms started to hurt again, so he pulled over outside Old Man Gower's drugstore. His arms had been giving him problems for a few weeks now. It was like a burning sensation down both his forearms, excruciatingly painful at times, but Doc Mackenzie couldn't find anything wrong with them. There were no marks. Nothing showed up on the X-ray. It was a complete mystery. He grabbed a tub of cooling ointment from Old Man Gower's shelves and dropped 25 cents into the open till, then hopped back in his old Ford and headed for home. It had been 2 years since they returned to Earth, 2 years since they'd skidded to a landing in the middle of the Sahara Desert. As they'd opened the airlock and stepped out into the baking heat, an army of jeeps and helicopters had descended on them. The world's press went crazy. The 3-million-year-old men. Space adventurers. Rimmer lapped it up. The cat adored it, but Lister just wanted to get away. He changed his name to George Bailey and opted for the peaceful anonymity of a backwater town in the American Midwest. He couldn't believe it when he discovered there actually was a town called Bedford Falls. He'd gone there on a whim to take a look, and was stunned by how similar the place was to the Bedford Falls in the movie It's a Wonderful Life. It seemed like fans of the film had all collected there to live out their lives in a self-created 1940s American Shangri-La. But something was wrong with his arms, and it was beginning to worry him. He turned the Ford into the tree-lined drive of his old house and honked his horn 3 times. The snow lay thick and deep on the lawn, and a huge 8-foot snowman was grinning a welcome in coal. He walked into the parlour. A log fire was burning merrily in the grate. Jim and Bexley were smashing Silent Night out of the complaining piano, while Chrissy was standing on a stepladder, putting tinsel on the Christmas tree. When the kids were in bed, they sat snoozily in the big leather armchair with the springs poking through the back, watching the fire splutter and splurt, and listening to Hoagie Carmichael on the wind-up phonograph. After Chrissy climbed the stairs to their drafty bedroom with a leaky roof, he took out the ointment. He didn't want her to know about his arms, and began to apply it to the sore areas. It came as something of a shock that, when he'd put the cream specifically on the areas that throbbed and hurt, it spelt out a word written in pain down his forearm. The word was dying. The black stretch Mercedes with a tinted bulletproof glass glided along the Champs-Élysées and pulled up outside the canopy of the 140-floor skyscraper. Rimmer finished his phone call to his publicist, then stepped out of the limo. A string of bodyguards kept at bay the group of teenage girls who'd camped out on the steps overnight in the hope of catching a glimpse of AJR. He allowed them a thin smile as he walked under the canopy and up the marble steps into the Rimmer Building, Paris. The Rimmer Building, Paris, was an identical copy of the Rimmer Building, London, and the Rimmer Building, New York. He walked across the massive lobby and nodded almost imperceptibly at Pierre, the Sorbonne graduate he'd hired exclusively to press the button that summoned the lift. The lift took a full 90 seconds to arrive, so he fired Pierre and pressed the button himself for floor 140, his luxury penthouse suite. The fact that he can actually press the button at all was, in a way, the key to the immense fortune he'd amassed since his return to Earth 2 years previously. After the hero's welcome, his cunning business brain had taken full advantage of the offers which flooded in daily. With the money he culled from advertising and the publication of his memoirs, he'd set up the Rimmer Research Centre, which had finally invented the solidgram, a solid body that housed his personality and intellect. He was now exactly like any normal living person, with the added bonus that he was more or less immortal. The solidgram had sold in such quantities, his income from that alone allowed him to buy the Bahamas for somewhere to go at weekends. It amused him no end that he was now one of the 3 or 4 richest men in the world, while Lister was stuck in a dead-end burger bar in a dead-end town somewhere in the middle of nowhere. Rimmer was now well into the complicated negotiations to buy up the entire town, which he intended to turn into a huge maggot farm. Just for the hell of it.
Red Dwarf, Infinity Welcomes Careful Drivers, was written by Grant Naylor and performed by Chris Barry. Additional music and effects were by Nick Graham. Technical presentation by John Etchells. Produced by Chris Wallace.